It's in the back on the first bookshelf that just has the article bylaw language and some of the maps in case you can't see it up on the screen. So it might help from the map perspective at least. So there's also a sign-in sheet if you can sign in. But otherwise, thank you all for attending. We're excited to hold this session. I am Andrew McNichol, the Community Development Director. To my right is Olivia Knightley, Senior Planner. So we're going to jump right into it tonight in this presentation and then go straight to Q&A from there. So tonight's agenda is to really provide an overview of the concept geographies being brought to town meeting that would bring the town into compliance with the MBTA Communities Law. There is a strong focus on downtown in both concepts and both articles, and we'll take a look at the overall updates across Article 16 and Article 17, and then we'd love to get questions from you guys, both what will help clarify the concepts for you and what may help prepare updates and additional confidence that we can build with you guys on the concepts. So we're going to set the goals to build an understanding of each bylaw. This is not necessarily a debate on which article is better. We're going to seek to determine what helps you understand the bylaws in and of themselves, and then prepare any updates that we can from there. So those were the goals of tonight's meeting. I want to start by establishing what were community identified goals throughout what has been a nearly 2-year-long process now for the MBTA communities. So throughout the process, we've heard a lot of different opinions, a lot of different needs, a lot of different thoughts, but some overarching comments were taken away consistently across all the meetings and any concept that was put out there. Those would be provide an opportunity for managed housing and commercial growth, maximize affordable unit potential in the MBTA Communities Law because it does have some limitations. We were sought to minimize impact to single-family zoning, and set to achieve near minimal compliance for the town of Reading so that we can, any other future zoning amendments would be fully within the town's ability to not face compliance metrics, I should say. So the concepts that are being brought to town meeting, there are 2 articles being brought to town meeting, Article 16 and Article 17. Article 16 is here on the left, and we'll go over this in more detail. We'll blow it up, but it focuses around utilizing the downtown zoning district, which is right in the center of town, and what we're proposing to call the Business D zoning district, which is a piece of South Main Street and a piece up on North Main Street. Article 17 really focuses around the downtown in the exact same fashion with what we call an A80 expansion, apartment 80 expansion, and that would be those dark blue corners proposed over here in the southeast and southwest parts of town. We'll take a look at them in bigger detail. We'll start with the downtown. So as a reminder, the downtown amendments proposed are consistent across both articles. They are the same. We focused on the downtown district because we are able to upzone the by right density. We'll show what that means in a second within the existing district without changing boundaries. And what that allows us to do is capture nearly 2/3 of unit capacity, which is a requirement of the law to establish minimum unit capacity. And by using the downtown district alone, we can achieve nearly 2/3 of the capacity requirements and meet the half-mile requirements for such. It's a little technical. We can go over it if anybody has questions, but we'll see what that looks like on the built ground. By using the downtown 40R district as well, what that allows us to do is maintain a 20 to 25% affordable unit requirement. And that is huge because the law really limits you to 10% or slightly more if you can prove it. But because we have an existing 40R district, we are able to maintain the 20 to 25% requirement, which is nearly double what we were approved for in the other districts. It does promote growth and fits in with existing forms and characteristics of the downtown, both historically and of recent development patterns that you've seen in the recent years. To summarize the changes, that first bullet, we're proposing that update from by right max density on a lot from 20 units an acre to 35 units an acre. There's some new requirements to add a minimum open space on by right projects, increase the front setback, and we're proposing to revise the parking requirements. Let's take a look at what those look like. So this top row is the existing, what we call dimensional controls of 40R projects. Dimensional controls establish your lot coverage, your building heights allowed, your setbacks from front yard, side yard, rear yards, and they set the parking requirements as well. What we have proposed for amendments is to increase the front setback from 0 to 5 feet, establish a minimum open space, that 5% open space where none currently exists, and there's more detail on that to come. Revise the parking requirements from a per bedroom requirement right now to a per unit requirement, and establish that new by right density on projects. We'll go through them a bit more just to show what they actually mean in the built world. So that 5-foot front setback that's being proposed is really sought through community feedback to add to the pedestrian realm and keep some separation from the development and the sidewalk and right-of-ways. So this image here is the 18 Woburn Street development, which was recently completed. It's not the perfect example because we're requiring 5 feet right now. During this process, when that wasn't required, what we were able to come to was a 2-foot setback in certain areas. And what we did with that 2-foot setback, it doesn't sound like a lot, but we made room for additional planting beds and concrete sidewalk area. So now in front of that development, you have an increased sidewalk width and that feel to the pedestrian realm to add the street trees, add the planting boxes. So having that 5-foot setback established to the front yard line can help us add to the pedestrian realm, and that's really the goal of it. The open space, I know it sounds small in terms of 5% of a lot size, but we have to remember that because it's a percent, that it scales with lot sizes that could be developed. This is the postmark down on Sanborn and Haven. This is what is close to a pocket park example on the Sanborn Street side. This is actually close to 4% of their lot size, I believe, but that's really the point of the establishment of the 5% open space requirement, is that when we create separation with the pedestrian realm, use it effectively to soften the development, to add shading, add space that residents can use, and add, vitality, whether that's outdoor dining, pedestrian space, resident space, or other. So keeping it at 5%, we'll see there's some increases in later requirements, but 5% on large lots adds up pretty quickly, especially in the downtown district where there is a lack of green space, maybe in that inner core, but the parks surround it. So trying to soften that up a bit. Open space, importantly, does include green space, hardscape, outdoor dining area, etc. Really promoting creativity for a development to come in and look what may best fit the area and the neighborhood. To visualize the density, because I do think that's one of the bigger changes that catches people's eyes, from 20 to 35 units per acre allowed on the lot, we wanted to show what that means. From a variety of lot sizes, because it's based on acreage, right, density units per acre, on our smaller downtown lots, you see a variety of allowances. So on smaller lots from the 6,000 to 10,000 square foot range, you're looking at 5 to 8 units, which has been done before. And as the lots scale up, you're now seeing an increase in units. But in our downtown district, we are trending towards smaller lots that exist in size currently in their current state. The average 40R project has been approved at just under 60 units an acre to date, and that's where we kind of settled and found with Cpdc that 35 is an appropriate allowance, that it does not go beyond what has been built today while still keeping some restrictions for a potential waiver process and a discretionary review under the waivers. Our median allowance on a lot would be 5 units, average trends a little higher towards 8, but you can see that that means we're within the 6,000 to 10,000 square foot lot on average in the downtown district. These are two examples that were recently built. One would be considered a new by right project, one would still not be by right. On the left here, this is 14 Chapin Ave. This is a 3-unit structure on, I believe it's a 6,000 square foot lot. This is at 22 units an acre, just under. It still required a waiver process in the past because we only allowed up to 20. It was a long, lengthy review for that waiver process. It's a pretty energy efficient building. They did a lot of good things with that building. There's yard space in the rear that you can't see here. There's guest parking. There's all sorts of things. But for that, they still required the waiver for this 3-unit structure that may fit into the neighborhood in the downtown. Because we're proposing that new density of 35 units an acre, this project and projects similar to this would not need a waiver for the density. However, a project like the Chronicle, again recently built in the last year or two, 7 units on an even smaller lot, you can see that density automatically goes up, right? More units on a smaller lot. We're looking at just under 55 units an acre. This project would still require a waiver, just as it did before. There would still be a lengthy discussion on what the public benefit is, what is the need for this project to be at that density, and how we partner in it going forward. So these are just 2 projects out of 9, I think, that have been built in the last 10 years in the downtown. But to date, this is the only project, 14 Chapin, built under that 35 units an acre being proposed. So that's why we found that that was an appropriate middle ground for a moderate increase in density going forward. To cover the parking changes, I'll try to keep this one simple, but current projects have been building about 1.5 parking spaces per unit on the project. They utilize a little less based on cars that are registered to those parking, but that means there's maybe some extra spaces for guests, commercial users, et cetera, if they can get in there. The current parking requirements are now based on per bedroom. So studios and ones require certain parking spaces, 2 bedrooms require more, 3 bedrooms require even more. What we're proposing is to bring it back to a flat requirement per unit, a 1.5 parking space per unit rather than the per bedroom. And just as a quick example, on the Gould Street project, they were only required to build 69 parking spaces. They did so. Under the per bedroom language that now exists, they would have had to build 79 parking spaces. Under the proposed 1.5 spaces per unit instead of bedroom, we'd be looking at 83 parking spaces. The math doesn't always work out that way in terms of net new increase, but in this example, because this project did have 3 bedrooms, we thought it was one of few with some 3-bedroom units. We found it a good example to show that a per unit requirement can still mean more parking spaces rather than less on a per bedroom basis. Importantly, in the downtown district, that by right limitation of density is not always sufficient for development. So what they come in seeking is waivers for excess density. And with the community, we built a few years ago what we called the tiered waiver schedule, that as you sought to increase your density, you are now subject to new requirements for the site, additional open space, additional parking, additional commercial space, things of that nature that would add to the benefit for the public for that trade-off in increased density. Currently 3 tiers exist. Because of the new change to the proposed density for by right, we are bringing it down to 2 tiers, from 3 tiers to 2. So we're proposing to change some of the criteria in terms of what that units per acre is, but all of the actual requirements are still maintained today, and including tier 1 requirements that are no longer tier 1. What we've done is move any increase in commercial percentage to either by right projects or in these later tiers. So there's been no loss of tiers and requirements for excess density. They're just located elsewhere now. We do maintain the cap of 50 units per acre, importantly. That was established at town meeting. They felt strongly that we needed a density cap to not overbuild lots and over densify the downtown. So just to reiterate, all tier triggers are maintained. We're just reducing the tiers from 3 to 2. And that's the downtown district in a nutshell. It sounds like a lot on paper. It looks like a little less. We're happy to talk through it, walk through it all, but those downtown changes are consistent across Article 16 and Article 17, and again, are really set to 1, maximize potential affordable units out of development, and 2, maximize the unit capacity requirements under Section 3A, and that we can capture all of the needed unit capacity in the 2/3 of the needed unit capacity in the downtown district alone with these changes. How do we make up the rest of the unit capacity is the question, and this is why there's two articles being brought to town meeting through the Cpdc. So in the 2 articles, you'll see some consistencies. We wanted to establish this first. Both articles are set to add new affordable unit requirements. We call this inclusionary zoning in the bylaw itself. And in any of these geographies, we are now requiring 12.5% of projects that are 13 or more to include, I'm fumbling on that language. We are requiring projects of 13 units or more to provide 12.5% of their units to be affordable. So we are getting over 10% of affordable units in larger projects in both districts. And that's important, again, for the town to maintain its SHI tracking and remain over 10% town-wide so we can protect ourselves and have safe harbor from 40B. Both districts establish the same clause, the same uses, the same triggers, the same affordability requirements. Both also are set to establish new landscape standards for any new development going forward. In the past, landscape requirements on Main Street or in the apartment 80 districts were subject to multifamily housing only. We are now proposing that commercial, mixed use, and multifamily all have landscape requirements tied to them. So you'll see the number go down a little bit, but it's now applied to more projects going forward. So Article 16 is, again, that downtown district partnering with, again, what we'll call the business D conversion. We're proposing to convert existing business area from business A to business D. So, and a little bit of single family zoning parcels down here at the tail end of the South Main Street piece. So we're really looking at this upper piece of South Main Street here from Summer Ave to Washington Street. And this would be the Home Goods Commercial District, Dandelions, et cetera, up on North Main Street, proposed for new zoning as well. We utilize these areas because we can substantially mimic business A allowances that currently exist. We do have to modify some controls for multifamily. It is allowed in the business districts already, but we do have to modify some for compliance sake. And we're also looking at some mixed use amendments as well, which is commercial on the first floor, residential on top. We want to maintain existing controls for all other uses, commercial, hotel, et cetera, if they're allowed, but housing and mixed use specifically, we're looking at some proposed amendments we'll go over. We'll establish those affordable housing requirements for projects 13 units or more in the corridor, and we'll establish that landscape standard as described. So let's take a jump into the controls here. This is the table of uses you'd find in the bylaw. As you can see, right, we have existing business A, business B, business C. We're proposing that business D column, and because we are converting business A to business D under the proposal, what we've done is completely mimic all uses already allowed in the district. You can see that multifamily dwelling is already allowed in business A, and that is just maintained in the by right proposal under business D. This is a bigger table because I wanted to capture multifamily and mixed use changes. So these are the dimensional controls again, those setbacks, lot coverages, et cetera. We'll run through them one by one here. So we'll look at these top 2 rows first. We're looking at multifamily only in the proposed business D district. Current regulations are established at a 40,000 square foot minimum lot size. We're proposing to bring that down to 10,000 square foot minimum lot size. That is, again, in efforts for compliance because the law focuses so heavily on by right allowances. What that means is lots have to be able to be developed by right. And by lowering the minimum lot size, we can establish more potential lots for development in the by right scenario. We are establishing a minimum lot width with the 60-foot frontage that does not currently exist today. We're looking at proposing some new setbacks, front setback from 15 foot to 10, rear setback from 30 foot to 25 foot, side from 30 foot to 10. I know that sounds like a larger change in terms of the setbacks that exist for multifamily, but when you do compare them to the setbacks that exist for mixed use, they're actually not too far off, if not more. We have our larger front setback, a larger rear setback, and the same side setback that is already being utilized today for mixed-use development. We are establishing a 70% lot coverage that's fairly consistent with existing mixed use. We are proposing to reduce multifamily height allowed from 4 stories to 3 stories on Main Street. And that landscape requirement, while it does drop to 25% to 15%, again, that's now required on more projects alone. Parking remains the same, 1.5 spaces per unit for multifamily dwellings. FAR limitation is being proposed to be removed because what we're looking to do is establish a similar density cap. 25 units per acre on Main Street on those parcels. We'll take a look at what that looks like going forward. And we will cover mixed use in more detail too, but just quickly for mixed use allowances, we are proposing that increase to the rear setback in the Business D district, a slight increase in that lot coverage to match the multifamily allowance, and that new landscape requirement for mixed-use projects that did not previously exist. We do have a 4-story height allowance for mixed use, both existing and proposed. That's, again, to incentivize commercial development in our commercial corridor with the multifamily housing allowances. Commercial also has parking requirements for mixed use as well. Importantly, again, these proposed multifamily controls, which are really set for that compliance sake, fit in between the existing multifamily and mixed use allowances and establish that new density cap that has not previously existed in the district in the corridor. So to help visualize that density of what 25 units per acre could look like, let's start at our minimum lot size, right, 10,000 square feet. We'd be looking at about 6 units on that lot. As you double that, 20,000, you're looking closer to 11 to 12 units. And as you get closer to an acre, of course, you're closer to that 25, 26 units allowed. Existing multifamily developments on Main Street average about 28 units per acre. And so when we look at the 25 units per acre, it's right around in line with the average development. It's slightly even less so that we maintain that control, we maintain those characteristics, and we maintain that density without overbuilding the corridor. So our median allowance here is 8, the average is 15. That's what you might expect on the average project. Again, as lot sizes changes as lot sizes of lots of different size get developed, those units change, right? The home goods parcel, for example, is a very large parcel, so they can have more units because of the density allowances. They still have to fit the parking, the setback, the lot coverage, the landscape, everything on site, which could limit them as well in the density, but they'd be allowed to try up to that 25 units an acre. So just as visual examples, this was a recent development, what may be well known as the former Smith Oil site on Main Street, 269 Main Street. It's 24 units. It's a large parcel, but a substantial amount is wet. So when you look at the developable acres of 1.7 acres, we're looking at a 14 units per acre average on this site. That was a by right project. They were in the apartment 40 district. Went through site plan review, went through conservation, got a number of benefits like trail easements, public access easements to utilize trail development in the rear of the site, And we established these front landscapes to really help soften Main Street. It is built up a little bit, admittedly. They mounded that site. It's a little high on Main Street, but this was a older multifamily use on Main Street, the Belmont Arms, 237 Main Street. 46 units on about 2.5 acres, coming in just under 20 units an acre. We thought this was a good visual example because it's around the density we'd be looking at to establish in the by right. You have your 3-story allowance here, just like we're proposing. And I say this and show this because there's more than just these on the corridor. So this development has happened in the past, it is happening today, and it is going to continue to happen through our existing mixed-use bylaw that we'll see in a second. So as we look at mixed use, I do just want everybody to know mixed use amendments are not necessary for the MBTA community's compliance sake, but they are worth a look as we look to facilitate more multifamily development. How do we also ensure we're seeing commercial development along with that if this proposal went forward? We are maintaining our special permit requirement for mixed use in the Business D corridor because we don't have to allow it by right because it's not subject to the law. That's a discretionary approval through the Cpdc. We've seen it used well before, and we will likely see it again going forward. So to summarize the changes for mixed use, what we are proposing is to slightly reduce the required commercial percentage from 25% of total floor area to 20%, establish those new landscape and open space requirements, substantially match the existing controls that exist today, the setbacks, the lot coverage that we went over, establish a new affordable units trigger. We're going to increase the trigger from 10 units to 13 unit projects, but increase the required percentage from 10% to 12.5%. That matches the multifamily housing language we went over again so as to not disincentivize mixed use with stronger affordability requirements than multifamily alone. We do allow waivers for mixed use projects. Unlike multifamily projects, there is some allowances for that. But what we established through this is that the Cpdc would not look at a waiver for commercial floor area less than 12.5%, which is around the average development that we see both downtown and in the district. And we would not allow a building height waiver in the district. So you cannot go over 4 stories. I'm going to ask you to save your question to the end if you can.
I don't remember, but so the two of us remember. I'm just curious about why you're reducing the commercial percentage from 25 to 20. You can address it later.
Yeah, I'm fine to address that one now. From 25% to 20%, we've heard pretty consistently from development that 25% is a very high number to achieve in a mixed-use project. Again, in the downtown and in the Main Street, we've seen an average closer to 12%. Some do skew higher, but 25% from what we've learned is fairly high. Bringing it down to 20 still keeps us above average, but may help us facilitate a bit more commercial development. We just want to make sure that commercial development is feasible in this location. These are 2 mixed-use projects. The one on the left has been approved by the Cpdc through a special permit. This is 30 units on about 1 acre, so you can see that it's a slight increase in density, 30 units an acre. 4 stories allowed, commercial on the front floor, multifamily on top. This one did achieve the 25% commercial requirement and some strong parking in the rear and landscape in the rear through the special permit process. The one on the right here is a current proposal before Cpdc, so it's not yet an approved, but it is our second proposed mixed-use project. You can see that that's 15 units on about a 1/4 acre, and that density immediately skews upwards towards about 65 units an acre. So density alone can skew high when units start to increase. But it's about finding the right fits. This is about currently proposed at near a 15% commercial requirement. Again, that's a waiver process through the Cpdc, so that's something they have to consider along with the community of is that waiver worth the trade-off. There are affordable units in both. 10% of units are affordable, so 3 in this development. At the current proposal of 15 units, we'd be looking at 2 affordable units on the right. The last amendment to the Article 16 is a map amendment. Again, not just retitling Business A to Business D in these 2 areas, but what we'd also like to do is unsplit some lots on the South Main Street piece. So by split zoning, I mean almost every lot on the South Main Street piece is split between Business A and single 15 zoning, even though a majority are not single 15 uses. By unsplitting the lots, it helps the compliance sake, and it helps provide clarity for residential abutters, development applications, and the community process coming forward. So it looks like a major change, but when you look at the bylaw, what we allow already is a 30-foot extension for split zone parcels that are proposing non-multifamily uses, without getting too into the weeds. But that 30-foot extension, which you can't see here, you might be able to see it on your handout better, but it already allows a number of these lots to commercially develop their whole site, with the exception of a few larger ones. And those larger lots that are being unsplit are substantially wet and or already have parking or commercial development to the rear. So by unsplitting the lots, it's really in essence for compliance, right? Adding acreage, making it clear in the unit capacity what is allowed to be built, and providing clarity for all going forward, because split zone parcels cause a lot of confusion during the plan review process for many people involved. Importantly, again, there's a few S15 parcels down here that got a little cut off towards Summer Ave that are proposed for conversion from S15 to Business D. A number of them don't meet the 10,000 square foot lot size requirements. We've tried to engage with those people throughout the process. A number of residents in that area have asked to be included if Main Street went forward. So it is included in this district boundary, those parcels, to really connect to the Business A piece that's to the south of it. So in summary, that would be Article 16. The proposed downtown district, we'd be looking to update max density allowed by right from 20 units an acre to 35 units an acre on a lot. We'll establish that 5% minimum open space requirement to help soften the development. We'll increase the minimum front setback to help add to the pedestrian realm. We'll update the residential parking requirements from per bedroom to per unit, so as to not disincentivize 3-bedroom or family units. And we'll adjust that tiered waiver schedule, making sure that we capture all of the required density bonuses, we'll call them, elsewhere or in later tiers. The Business D district will look to amend the multifamily controls, those lot sizes, setbacks, lot coverage, and so on, establish the minimum open space, require affordable units for 13+ unit projects, look to amend mixed use controls slightly, and propose the map changes of the conversion from Business A and S15 to Business D in the 2 districts seen, and by unsplitting those South Main Street lots. So that's Article 16. I threw a lot at you. We're going to quickly go through Article 17. There's a little less to it because we don't get into mixed use, so we'll quickly do that. So Article 17, to remind all, it utilizes the downtown district amendments proposed in the exact same fashion and partners the remaining unit capacity needs with what we call the A80 expansion. A80 is short for Apartment 80 District. It's an existing zoning district in town that is located right to the southeast of town for the Summit Towers development. We'd be proposing to expand that slightly over these parcels to capture the Gazebo Circle development. And over on the southwest piece of town, that's the Reading Commons 40B development. So we would look to place the A80 district over that as well. It's currently an S15 zone development. That was a 40B, so it went through a different approval process. The proposed changes are summarized. We do have to adjust the controls, dimensional controls, again, setbacks, lot coverage, height, et cetera. We are establishing a new density limitation and requiring new affordable units if development were to occur here in the same fashion for 13+ unit projects. Adding in a new landscape requirement consistent with the sites as they exist, and propose those map changes for the boundaries and district titles. So when you look at the existing A80 controls, we have a large established minimum lot size of 80,000 square feet on nearly 2 acres. That's being maintained here because the parcels are all of size to be able to meet that. We are establishing a minimum lot width again, a wide minimum lot width that might be consistent with that 80,000 square foot. We are proposing to reduce the setbacks pretty substantially here from 60 feet to 20, 20, and 30 in the rear. That lot coverage does increase 12.5% to 50%, and height drops from 5 to 4 stories. Landscape does slightly drop 35% to 20%, but 20% of an 80,000 square foot lot is a substantial amount of open space. Parking is maintained. We are establishing, rather than an FAR, a unit limit on the lots in the 20 units per acre. These sites, Reading Commons, Summit Tower, Summit Village, and Gazebo Circle, all exist in the 12 to 18 units per acre range. So the 20 units per acre is fairly consistent with what's already there, while still potentially maybe 1 or 2 of them could add some development in the future and some new housing units if they ever wish to. Just again, for a closer zoom on the area, this is one of the Summit Towers or Summit Village's buildings. There's multiple of them over here, but they already exist in these districts from 2 to 5 stories. So we're looking to match the existing parcel boundaries on the map expansions of these developments and convert some from S15 to that A80 district. I think the term has been used kind of paper compliance sometimes for this concept or this article. I wouldn't go that far because we have the downtown district amendments and because there is always the chance that maybe these developments could add units to them in the future. So in summary, a little shorter here, those exact same downtown district amendments that we went over. And the A80 expansion really amends multifamily controls over the A80 districts to establish the unit capacity needs to reach compliance. We would require affordable units on 13+ unit projects if these areas were to build new structures, new towers, new housing. And those map changes described converting those parcels specifically from S15 to A80. So just to refresh those 4 community established goals throughout the process, provide opportunity for managed housing and commercial growth. I think both articles achieve that, both with the downtown district amendments, while helping facilitate multifamily development, not being too overly allowing in terms of what's been built today, and keeps the incentives for the mixed use commercial allowances. Same can be said for Article 17 as well. More specifically on Main Street as well, I think CPDC did a good job of finding the answers that, again, facilitated development without exceeding what exists, what is being proposed today as well. Maximizing affordable unit potential, I think we've done that through the downtown district, minimizing impact to single-family zoning. Both articles do have some slight amendments to single-family zoning, but they're fairly limited. A handful of parcels, a handful of acres in both that are already established residential uses or commercial uses. And near minimal compliance. I know we didn't really go over what the minimum compliance numbers are, but really the driving factor in that to date has been unit capacity. The town is required to zone for just under 1,500 units. Both concepts are slightly over 1,500 units, which gives us a little bit of breathing room, but they are less than 100 units over the required allowances. So That's Article 16 and Article 17 in a nutshell. Again, I threw a lot at you. There's a lot of differences to each and a lot of technicalities to each, but we're here to help. I think CPDC has done a great job. I think you guys as a community has done a great job providing feedback, providing input, and helping us get to this point. So thank you for that. We're happy to take any questions that may come up.
So my understanding is that either of these plans still need to be presented on the stage.
Correct.
And so my question is, do you have either of them?
That's really there just to capture you so you can sit where you are. You don't have to pass it around.
Okay. So my question is, have either of these plans been reviewed at all with the state? And if not, is there any belief that one or the other has a higher probability of approval by the state?
Neither has been reviewed by the state. Given our compressed timeline, we weren't able to submit for the early review process. But we have modeled them with the state's consultants through the grant work, and the numbers are there. Both, I think, have a practical chance of approval. We've seen the state in some approvals reduce unit capacity for some towns of their proposal, but whether that's for wetlands or historic or other reasons that the state has seemingly found for conditional approval, we feel that both of these are fairly straightforward and would get us compliance. I wouldn't say one is more favorable than the other. They're both technically compliant, and that's what matters.
First question, is this presentation, both parts of it, going to be part of town meeting, or is this the only time you're doing it? Because not every town meeting member obviously is making these
Right.
meetings, but I find it very helpful, especially these comparisons, and you managed to do it in 45 minutes, so to me I think that's good. So I would hope that's my first question is this going to be part of town meeting, what we're seeing?
This is expected to be a part of town meeting. I will not be giving the presentation. CPDC typically gives the presentation. If there might be some slight slide reductions if we can, just to help shorten the time, but it will be substantially similar to this presentation.
Yeah, to me, this was just enough time. So my second question is, and I've been following this closely, and actually I was surprised in your A80 presentation that I thought the density was going to be higher that you had. And a question I have is, so it's possible in the, I'll just call it the Main Street option versus whatever it is, because that's just what I know. That someone could develop any one of those parcels, because there's going to be so many overlays, just to be entirely residential with no commercial, correct?
Not every parcel, but 10,000 square foot or more parcels could be, yes, multifamily
Are most of
development.
the parcels along Main Street of that kind of sufficient size, though?
I'd say about 3/4 or more.
So my concern with the two options is I feel like with our nice mixed-use overlay that we already have on South Main, we could be, and in fact are, achieving, new housing while still maintaining commercial. And I'm concerned with the MBTA overlay that it's possible someone could go in there and just, not this is going to be Bagel World, but just take Bagel World and make it all apartments. Take Perfectos and make it all apartments. And yes, that's nice to get housing, but we're losing commercial. And I feel like we were already pretty compliant with our Summit Towers and Reading Commons because we're so close, and the changes you put in downtown. So that's just my preference, because I'm almost thinking, like, why are we even changing the mixed-use thing? We're almost there, do your 25% to 20% tweak or whatever, but I worry just about not requiring commercial, that we're going to lose commercial, as well as up on the home goods corner. And, I know those are possible areas, but I think we already have something that is going to provide new housing and is providing new housing. So that's just my thought.
Yep, heard. And I do think that's where the density cap really starts to play a role, especially for smaller lots, that by establishing a density cap, right, you're limiting the density of the lot and thus the financial feasibility of the lot. The mixed use does not have a density cap. So it facilitates that development through the extra story and allowed and the lack of density cap, but I definitely hear your point.
Okay.
Andrew, could you please go into a little bit of detail on what affordability really means? And is there a difference between something that's affordable in, is a 40R and in the MBTA district?
So by affordable units, we mean what's deed-restricted affordable units, and those are typical of limited to families or homeowners or residents that earn what we call 80% of the area median income. So those are deed restricted, that you have to qualify for those units based on your income and slightly lower income. There are different tiers. We've seen substantial 80% requirements of AMI, area median income in town. So those are affordable units. Affordable units are inputted into what's called your subsidized housing inventory, or SHI. That's where your total percent of housing stock should be 10% or more to protect you from safe harbor, to protect you under safe harbor from 40B developments that can override your local zoning, and we've seen many of those as well. The law limits you to an 80% AMI limitation instead of 60% or 50% median income. 80% is the number that they've allowed for the MBTA communities. They do allow up to 10% of units in a project to be required for affordable. If you want to go above that, you have to prove that it's financially feasible. We did do that. That's why we got to the 12.5% affordable units instead of 10%. But the 40R maintains that 20 to 25% requirement because it's existing, and we've seen that used to great success in the downtown.
So correct me if I'm wrong, then, the number that's used is the median income for Middlesex County,
Correct.
and 80% of that, I think from the 2022 numbers, makes it around $90,000.
Correct.
So either an individual or a family that's making $90,000 or less is acceptable under the definition of affordability.
The qualifications will change dependent on your household size. The income can change based on your household size, but in general, yes, closely to.
Okay, and a follow-up, has there been any economic assessment of how either or both of these scenarios would affect Reading in terms of police, fire, infrastructure? Because the infrastructure, I would think, is going to be different between the zones that we already have in the southern part and also up in the home goods area.
Mm-hmm.
So it seems like there would be a different calculus when we're going about thinking about how much this is going to cost Reading overall, because anything we do here is going to cost us money in the long run.
I will shout out our engineering and DPW department. They've done a wonderful job enhancing and stabilizing the current infrastructure, right? We just went through a series of downtown construction for utilities, sewer, water, et cetera. We've made substantial improvements on what we call inflow and infiltration to your sewer system, which improves the capacity of the existing sewer lines. We've really done a lot of work in town to help meet ongoing demand. It can be a little, we haven't studied it. We could study a sewer, but that's, again, you end up projecting to your full build out, which takes 10, 15, 20, 25 years, if ever, on a full build out analysis. So they are a little tricky to manage, and there's some context there that needs to be established. But right now, talking and working with the engineering division, we are confident, they're fairly confident, substantially confident in the infrastructure capacity as it exists today in these areas to manage any new development in the next 5 years, call it, or 10. And police and fire, that's right, as builds happen and builds change, you know, their numbers change in terms of their needs. But that one, again, is a bit harder to project in terms of what you need and when you need it. So I haven't seen a study on that, but.
Go ahead, Andrew.
No, go. Your hand is up.
Just a couple of real quick ones and then one major one. On the affordability standard, did I see somewhere that there was an aspect to it, not only of 80% of income, but of the family expense? Was that a part of it as well? That it can't be more than a certain amount of your expenses as well?
Yeah, so affordable units too have the requirement that the resident within that or family and household within that unit does not expend more than 30% of their annual income on their housing cost. When you're over 30%, you're what's considered cost burdened. So affordable units qualify that as well with the allowed rents or home ownership price as well with the homeowner or renter.
I thought so, and I just wanted to clarify that. Second real quick question, on the A80 expansion, I'm assuming that the changes to the setbacks was to get it to conform to the MBTA Communities Act requirements? Or was there other reason why you changed the setbacks?
Specific to Main Street or others, all of them?
On the 80.
On the A80, yeah, that was specific really for unit capacity needs in the model, and they're a bit closer to actually what exists already there today.
Okay. And my main question, which gets us a little bit off, but, and I've had this conversation with you before, can you talk a little bit about where the design guidelines are for this project? And actually related to that, I take it they're different. Are they different than the 40R design guideline document that already exists?
Yes, so there's an existing downtown design guidelines and there's an existing South Main Street design guidelines that we'd be looking at both for potential revisions and updates if anything moved forward. We are also working, and I don't have anything to share on it yet, but we just met with the consultants today. We're working on what's called a pattern book that we're calling it. And I think right now, if you look at the design guidelines in both districts, they're very text heavy, very technical, not a lot of visuals to show what it is we're looking for. We're working with the consultant to develop that pattern book that shows different potential elevations and renderings of the things that it is the community would like to see in these districts, whether that's 3 or 4 story or anything in between or less. So that pattern book, I think, will be a big tool because it really helps set the visual expectations from the streetscape and the different type of development styles that you can mimic in town because we have such a wide variety of architectural styles. We hope to share more on that in the coming weeks. It is being developed, it is being worked through. We just met today to go over the format of it and the expectations. It's just not there yet, so.
Okay, good, and I appreciate that, thank you, because the thing that I wanted to say, there's a lot of issues related to these that I know that everybody has, and I do as well, but one of my primary concerns is in the ability of the town through the site plan process to regulate the architectural design. And I know you and I have had this conversation before. I mean, I have taken the position that with respect to 40R, and it's equally true in terms of the requirements for the MBTA Communities Act, they all talk about affording the towns and the municipalities the ability to regulate to a certain degree the architectural design. I think that was true in the 40R regulations, and I still think it's true. It specifically mentions that in site plan review for purposes of the MBTA Communities Act, that the municipalities have the explicit right to regulate, among other things, architectural design. And I, for one, think that's critical to ensure that in all areas of the town, but particularly here, whichever way we go, that CPDC has the ability to not only discuss preferences and patterns, but to actually have some teeth to enforce architectural design standards and to imposed to a certain degree, whether it's through denial or whether it's through acceptance with conditions. And I just want to strongly urge, I will be interested in seeing that. I'm sure be hounding you as we go forward. And I likely may raise it at town meeting, that I think it's an important component of this process. And although it isn't a part of this, in my mind, it's an important aspect to what the town is willing to accept. So I'm asking you, and I'm asking CPDC, actually Tony, I don't know if anybody else is here. Okay. To assert as much control and authority as we can give them to regulate the architectural design. Thank you.
Heard. Just quickly, zoning has never regulated architectural design. It's always been about the dimensional controls. If you want to switch towards an architectural design, there's new tools called form-based code that more, again, where our pattern book is going is maybe trending towards a form-based code, but not fully to that nature. But that establishes a more visual aspect in architectural requirements. Form-based codes are nearly the opposite of your text-heavy zoning bylaw, but with similar requirements and controls in them, but they give that visual form a bit more ability to say this is what we want to see, and that's where we're going with the pattern book. I know that the design guidelines to date haven't ever been required per se by law, but I think on almost every project we've gotten the step backs associated with the design guidelines, the setbacks, maybe the architectural materials. We can go back and forth on that, but almost every project has achieved the design guidelines with minimum waivers from them, and that is true in downtown and South Main Street to date, as CPDC asked through them, especially on South Main Street where we have the special permit requirement. Currently, we can more directly aim for those because that's a discretionary approval. But I hear you.
And I appreciate that, although I would point out, as I know I have before, that specifically in the regulations that the state has implemented for the MBTA Communities Act, they specifically reference that the municipalities have the authority to regulate architectural design. Those aren't my words, those are the words in their regulations. It's in the regulations, I'll be happy to show you.
It's not in the law.
It's in the I said it was in the regulations.
It's in the guidelines.
It's in the, right.
Correct, but it is in their regulations, and all I'm asking is that we assert as much authority as we can. I would also add that, at least with respect to the 40R projects, we included language in the bylaw to empower CPDC to deny projects, specifically if they did not feel as though their words were complementary to the neighboring areas. So we're slowly moving in that direction. I don't want to belabor the point, but I strongly believe that the town should have more of a say in the architectural design of these projects. That's all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Heard. I'm gonna jump to Chris because I think he's talking about architecture as well.
Yeah, so I think you bring up a really good point, but I think you have to understand how the law is written. The law is written with two words that completely remove the controls you seek. And those two words are by right. So the by right zoning means that the only thing that developers have to follow is the state building code. That's it. Everything else is a review or a check or an evaluation, but there's no authority behind that, right? So CPDC can say, we will do a site plan review for this project, but if the zoning laws get passed and they are by right zoning, then they're cast in stone, and the only thing the developer has to do is meet those requirements and follow state building code. And the town really doesn't have the authority to say no. That's the reason behind the by right language.
I respectfully disagree with you. The by right language includes the ability for the town, for the municipalities, to implement site plan review. And where the regulation specifically allows site plan review to include regulating design, architectural design, I'm not suggesting I'm not suggesting that it is set in stone. I'm simply suggesting that the town should push as far as they possibly can, and if it means pushing on this point, then perhaps we should do it, is all I'm suggesting.
And I completely agree with you, because I want to see the controls that you want to see, but what I'm afraid of is that the town can push, and the developers can say, well, the law says it's by right, I don't want to do any of this stuff, it's only going to reduce my profit, I'm not going to do it, and you can't stop me. That's what I'm afraid of, right? So if CPDC or Andrew or anybody can show me where the town legally and authoritatively has that control, I'm all in. I completely agree with you. But I don't see that. And I've read the law. The law says nothing about that. Now, then they issued some guidelines after the law was written. And in the guidelines, they mention those things. But those guidelines are not, they're not part of the law. They're just suggestions for how the law can be implemented.
Wasn't that what the whole Milton SJC case is, though, is whether the guidelines are part of the law? Well,
Yeah,
I
they
was
still
listening
haven't
to the
defined
argument,
that.
right, so
They
we
haven't
don't know.
proved
That's
Exactly.
very
It's
important.
ambiguous, and all we're suggesting is
My
test
fear
it.
is if these get voted in by town meeting, then it's done. It's too late. The by right language, correct me if I'm wrong, Article 16 and Article 17 have by right language in there to meet MBTA communities. Is that correct?
Correct, but you can always go back to your zoning for future changes as well. And we have seen by right multifamily development before in town. This is not a new aspect to the town of Reading. Multifamily exists in town. Multifamily is a part of the character of town. Multifamily fits well into the town. So this is not a new review process for CPDC or for the town alike. I do hear you. Nobody wants an ugly building, like nobody. So I hear everything that's being said. We are working towards it. How we've approached it is that, like design guidelines, which I think really is what the state is referencing in their guidelines, is you can use design guidelines in your areas to help facilitate development that is more appropriate for your community, but you cannot require bricks, clapboard, mansard roofs. Like that's just, it doesn't exist in zoning. And so how we do it is we look to incentivize it through the things like the design guidelines and the pattern book, that if you come in with a project that looks like this and of this density, the community may feel it is more appropriate, and together we can work through the process to get through any development by right development application. So that's how we try to look at it, that we want to partner on these things. We want good development. We want the future residents to have a good development. We want the abutters of those developments to have a good development. And we want the developer to build a good development. And we want them to build a good development. So it all comes together if we work together. It is a hard thing to require. I can't say you have to have a pitched roof. You can't do a flat roof. You have to do a mansard. But we've seen them proposed because they know that they're fitting within to the neighborhood or the downtown or any other area like. So Angela's had her hand up for a while.
Thank you. So if these changes, so I've asked you this before, for the downtown smart growth district, this is replacing our 40R.
This is the 40R.
Is the new 40R. It's new regulations to the 40R. And none of this will affect our ability to get any income under the 40R program. Is that correct?
Correct. If anything, it'll add to.
Say that again?
Correct. If anything, we could potentially add new payments.
Okay. So I have a couple questions. With the parking, 1.5 units, so it's not going to be based on bedrooms. And why the change? Is there any data on existing projects that have gone on with our parking garages full? Is there a problem with residents needing more parking? I remember that being a very long, it's always tortured and long discussions. So I'm not sure why we're going back to per unit rather than per bedroom.
Yeah, so what we've seen, and I know this text is a little small and far away, but the 40R projects built to date have built at just under 1.5 parking spaces per unit. They're using less than that in their development. When you go by per bedroom, and this is not necessarily a requirement of the law, but right, what we'd be doing, what you tend to do in a per bedroom requirement is disincentivize 3-bedroom units or more, larger bedroom units, because you have to build more parking. So to facilitate different bedroom or unit sizes, we'd like to go to the per unit requirement just to facilitate that development style. Only about 9 units to date, I think, out of the over 200 built have been 3-bedroom. So they're not very common in these development styles, but we don't want to disincentivize them at the same time. So going to the per unit requirement gets us a substantially same number of parking spaces in most cases, and more than the parking that has been built to date on projects.
So, okay, so 27 one-bedroom, 22 two-bedrooms.
And 6 3-bedrooms. So that was the Ace Flats building on Gould Street. So you can see on the per bedroom requirement that, so they were built at a time where we had a 1.25 requirement for every unit. They built 69 spaces, which was the minimum. They built to that minimum for their project. If they were to build under the newer per bedroom requirement, it would have been an increase of 10 parking spaces. If you do the 0.15 per all units, you're looking at a 14 parking space increase on that development specifically. Again, that math might not always work out that way, but where a development, again, rare to have 3 bedrooms in the 40R, had a decent chunk of them, we thought this was a good example.
So that doesn't add up to 69, 34, 33, and 12. Does that add
Right,
up?
so, sorry, this should probably be under this bullet point. Those would be the per bedroom parking spaces that get to the 79. It should be under the second bullet point, sorry.
It was built before we changed the law, so
Right.
it doesn't have enough.
So it doesn't have enough.
Right, it's got 60.
Well, I
And-
believe they have enough for their residents. They do not have enough to satisfy the new current zoning.
Okay. And there hasn't been an outcry for lack of parking spaces
Not at the development
at
itself.
the developments themselves? Okay. And then my last comment is, everything that we've seen, except for that one, I think, on Chapin Street, it doesn't really seem to be getting at the mid-size housing. That is what people have been talking about. You know, we have the single family, we have the large apartment buildings, and you're talking about units, but as we've seen on Pineville and Maine, they can just be combined and make bigger things. How does this in any way incentivize those, you know, things that are, I think, more organic? Like if you just drive up Main Street in Stoneham, you see a lot of converted homes or new apartments that are duplexes or what look like might be 4-unit apartments in an older home. How does any of this get to that? Because that seems to be what we're missing.
Yeah, I would say that the current proposals do mimic the recent development styles of apartment style buildings. What we call the missing middle, right? That 2 to maybe 4 units, 8, 6, whatever you want to call it. It is a more difficult project in the financial sense, but we can and we have heard that that's a need in town, and Cpdc has heard that as well. What we found, and for those of you who were involved 2 years ago from the early onset, we had a proposal really substantially around allowing 1 to 4 units on a lot. It was converting a lot of single-family area because that's where it made some sense to do it, but the law itself was a bit limiting in that sense to try to promote it, because it was almost, from the community, we heard 2 allowing, because you could see 10 units on a larger lot or 12 in the areas. So it didn't make perfect sense in the law. we've heard through this process that smaller units like that, whether they're accessory dwelling units, whether it's 2-family, maybe even 3, that could fit into the town outside of the law. And so we can, with CPDC and with you as the community, look to establish those new priorities and next priorities for the zoning, because your zoning will eventually look to seek those builds. And I do agree that those missing middle homes are a substantial need in town. A strong percentage of our multifamily stock is 20 units or more. We have a lot of single family, as you mentioned, and a lot of apartment units. We have almost, I don't want to say nothing in between, but little less in between, so very much
This
hurt.
isn't gonna do it.
This could facilitate more 14 Chapin Aves, but, right, that's the outlier in the 40R district to date, so.
I just wanted to back up, because this may be something I'm supposed to know, and I don't think I do. Just in terms of the charge to town meeting with these 2 articles, is the idea that town meeting will approve one of them and not the other? Or, I mean, is there a possibility they could both be submitted to the state? And also, what is the deadline for, I mean, when does the state have to receive something from the town?
So the state, we have to submit before end of calendar year. So we're running fairly close to the deadline here. What town meeting does is what town meeting's going to do. You could approve one or the other, you could approve both, you could approve neither. I'm not really going to take a guess.
My issue with that is that, I mean, I've been to a few of these sessions, and I mean, I'm unclear, quite honestly. I mean, we have these 2 plans, they both look like they'd work. I'm not sure, I mean, I know there's a lot of details in terms of, what the town would like to achieve and so forth, but I've got to say, I'm really kind of at a loss in terms of, well, which one would be better, which might bring us a little bit closer to what we're looking for the town. With the South Main Street development, give more opportunity to have that street look better instead of kind of a mishmash of all different sizes and like it is now. Would the other one, be easier for people to accept? Because, I mean, I work at the polls and I was working early voting, and I heard a couple of people sounding off about this whole project, and it's turning Reading into a city and so forth. And I mean, I think there's a lot of emotional reaction.
Of course.
And so is that one maybe an easier one to swallow because it's, so I'm envisioning town meeting and the presentation, which is excellent, and all the work that's been done. But, there's so much in the details in terms of architectural, because I agree, we don't want heinous looking structures, but as a town meeting member, I don't, quite honestly right now, I mean, I could go for either one of these if somebody made the pitch, but I just don't know what the expectation is. Like I said, is if we're supposed to come out with one because we have to submit something.
Right.
So.
Might not, but.
So
If we
that's
submit
what I'm
both,
kind of at a
then we're
loss.
stuck with all of it, right?
I don't know. I mean,
Because we've
that's
amended
my-
our zoning.
That's my question. I don't know what, with the 2 articles, my assumption was we approve one and not the other, but then I don't know. I mean, I'm asking you, is that what we're supposed to do?
Yeah, I'm not gonna, yes, probably ideally one, right? In the ideal world, one or the other, but I don't want to limit anything that could happen at town meeting. I would say in the differences, the Main Street option likely allows for a bit more continuous development over time versus the A80 district. The A80 district, again, could maybe see a few additions of units, but it might be a one-shot, right? Because those lots are pretty built out right now. So,
I guess my, it's not really a question, but my quandary, and I don't know if there's an answer. It's just that it's very easy to get into the weeds with both of
Oh,
these.
yeah.
And where a decision really has to come because something has to be submitted by the end of the year. I'm just thinking if there's any possible way of kind of, I mean, obviously we need the details, but of giving some kind of overview of, okay, what this might accomplish, what this one might accomplish, just to help people make a decision, because as I said, I think it's tough.
It is tough. We've heard a lot of varied opinions over the 2 years, and I think that's where CPDC ended, of bringing the options to town meeting that try to satisfy the middle ground of everything that we've heard from those who want much more housing and everything in between to those who want little development, that these two options technically comply without overreaching the development patterns that are happening today. So it's using what is being built today, has been built in the past, is being built today, and allowing it to be built in the future while just getting compliance out of it. So again, the Main Street, because of its geography and its reach, probably a bit more likely in terms of continuous development, maybe over years, versus the A80 district. But the downtown in both has its benefits to facilitate development as well. So I don't have the perfect answer for you.
Yeah, I'm just envisioning what is going to happen, what the discussion may be, and I just would like to have some clarity about what the goal is and, what we're supposed to achieve by the end of town meeting, I guess.
Will CPDC be supporting one or the other?
They did not, they elected to bring both to town meeting. They did not favor one or the other.
Were they still going to call one Plan A and Plan B if the state doesn't reject one? Because I don't know how town meeting would be able to, submit contingency saying,
Yeah.
here, state, if you approve this, if you don't have it, here's the
Right,
backup.
right,
Because
yeah.
I've seen things where the state is kicking stuff back to people when they submit non-approved plans, or if they don't have any plan, I've seen them say, okay, you don't get your grants, before the Milton suing, but then they stick it back to modify it. So if we already had a backup plan, though, we don't know which is
Right,
which is
and
Plan A and which is Plan B.
yeah, I hear you. And there's ways, right, for us to look at that if they did slightly reduce unit capacity, that we can try to use existing A80 districts or A40 districts in the compliance model too, to try to maximize the small handful of units those might get us. And we can do that with or without their conditional approvals or reductions or anything like that. So I'm going to jump way in the back and then here in the middle.
Thank you, Andrew. Just looking at this current slide, I just want to make sure these unit capacity totals, they include existing units in that.
Correct. Yep. Yep.
So at the risk of belaboring this point, just want clarity to the extent that you have it. With respect to town meeting, and given town meeting rules about debating articles one at a time, right? So the pros and cons of Article 7 of Proposal 880 cannot be discussed when Article 16 is being debated, correct?
My understanding is that the moderator may look to allow the conversation on both, but that's up to him. I don't.
I guess my point is, so just for clarity, so both proposals, before we get into Article 16, Article 17, some version of this presentation that you just made will be presented.
Yep.
So that town meeting members can understand, right, the big picture that we've got two alternatives here, right, even though we're going to go into them in sequence, right? Both of them, in some version of this presentation, will be presented, right? And I guess one of my concerns is that, again, given town meeting rules, is that Article 16 will be debated, and if it passes, Article 17 will be tabled and never debated. And so I just want to make sure that that's not going to happen.
It could happen, but
If that's the case, my question is who decided the order that these articles would be presented in, and why were they ordered that way?
we looked at the unit capacity, and that with the higher unit capacity, I think in a CPDC meeting was requested to go first. But when we submitted for the warrant report, I did not want to make the decision of which went first or the other. So that's how we settled on it.
I didn't-
Total unit capacity, higher
Based upon unit density?
higher unit capacity to go first, because that's further from the goal of near minimal compliance.
Okay, but then at the end, you said you didn't want to make a judgment about which one went first?
Well, like personally, I wasn't going to make the judgment, so we went to the metrics to say,
Okay, so CPDC decided based upon the 1575 versus the 1526, is that what you're saying?
yes,
That was it?
yes.
Is there any CPDC member that's a current CPDC member here that can tell us?
What do you want to know?
So what, how did you decide the order?
I gotta figure out how to tactfully put this. There was not a unanimous view, there was not a unanimous view as to the members that favored one side, A or B.
Yeah,
And that's how it came out. Chickened out.
Tony, I think, had your hand up, and
So, I am no longer a member of CPDC. I was here at the beginning. So, in my mind, and these are my personal thoughts, the Business D proposal is more likely to be accepted by the state than the A80 expansion, which is probably why that's going first. So if town meeting approves Business D, we may meet state requirements. We do not need, therefore, to vote on the 880 expansion.
That's what I thought.
What are you basing that on? How do you know what's more likely to get approved? Because the A80 is almost just like what Winchester had approved, right?
Well, except if you look at the MAPC plans,
Is MAPC part of the review of all of our plans? Do they review our plans?
I don't know on that, but I will tell you this. The MAPC has tools for every town. One of the tools is a map of developable property in town based along the MBTA community rules. And they break down every piece of property and give it a ranking on how developable it is. So in the A80 expansion, virtually all of the property that we're including is listed as less than 6% developable. So while it meets the technical rules of the MBTA community's regulations, it may not pass muster from the state because they may put in a factor for those 1,526 units. They may multiply them by saying, okay, well, the developable potential for these lots is only 10%. I'm only going to give you credit for 150 units.
So is the state using this MAPC guideline, or you're just guessing they might?
My understanding is that it's part of the calculation.
So how did Winchester pass? Because Winchester has almost half their plan
If
is.
you look at what Winchester does, the properties that Winchester chose are well over 50% developable on those lots, based on the MAPC map.
They're existing developments, you mean just they have more land on them?
They have, they make a determination based on the type of property. Condos are listed as less. The number of units, whether it's historical, whether the buildings have been built within the last 20 years. And these are used to make a determination on how developable that property is.
Okay.
So the Business D has more or a higher developable percentage or score than the A80 expansion.
Town meeting any town meeting member can make a motion to take an article out of order.
correct.
And it would be voted on by town meeting. So whether or not town meeting, somebody made a motion whether or not town meeting decided, yeah, let's take them out of order, that might give you a good indication of which way they
But do you have to vote, though?
That comes up for a vote. If somebody has to table an article, everybody has to vote on whether to
Yeah.
table.
So there
You
are
can say
ways
no,
to just, for
and then
town
they have to
meeting,
debate.
yeah, there are ways for town meeting to decide
Yeah,
how
I
they
just-
want it.
Because
I just think it's better to, like, I've heard some conflicting things. Tonight I heard from you earlier, Andrew, that someone asked a question, and I think, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you answered by saying both were likely to be approved by the state.
Yeah.
And I heard here, well, one is more likely to be approved by the other. So those, to me, are different answers. And I think it's personally better to be proactive in addressing that up front instead of keeping it under the rug and waiting for someone to ask the question.
Well, I'm just concerned that I mean, I'm not sure I'd want to vote on just one article without hearing the other choice. That's the issue. I mean, you know, if the
That's my
first one
point.
comes up to vote,
And hearing a healthy discussion on both choices, too.
yes, and discussion.
Members can raise their hand to notify the moderator and say they'd like to do a point of order, and that is to suggest that debate happen on both articles before they are put to a vote, or any number of different tools to facilitate that very thing.
So if that can be done in
It's up to the
advance.
moderator.
It's up to the moderator
You
to
can do that, I think you can do that. You can't talk to the time, you could discuss one, somebody could table it and move on to the next one, and then bring the next one
Well,
up.
they can say, point of order, I'd like to table the vote on Article 16 until we hear the debate on
Right.
Article 17. Then we can come back and vote on 16, yea or nay, and then vote on 17,
Or
yea
vice
or
versa.
nay. Or vice versa, right? So I think you have the ability to hear the arguments for both
Right.
articles
Yeah, that's
before any
important.
votes happen.
But it would be
As long as
helpful
the
to have-
moderator agrees and allows that.
It shouldn't be just up to the moderator. what the
Well,
people
it
think.
would be
No, but
helpful
it
to
is.
have that set up ahead of time so we don't spend 45 minutes discussing the mechanics of how we're going to
Are
discuss
there
it.
new town meeting
No.
members sworn in at this meeting in November?
Yes.
So that would be a good question to ask the moderator, right after everybody's sworn in, what's the process by which we can ensure that we hear the debate of both Articles 16 and 17 before either one of them is voted on? And he'll explain exactly how to do that. And he might even say, I was going to do that from the get-go because I think it's important for everybody to hear both articles before they vote.
But haven't, for those town meeting members who've been around for a while, I have a vague recollection that there have been articles, they might have been, these are clearly related in a sense, but and maybe it was budget issues, but there have been a couple of articles where we have discussed, and he has allowed us to discuss both of them.
But that was one article with several options in it.
Right.
I don't remember discussing two articles at the same time. There was one, I think,
Okay,
wasn't
Didn't we do that with Lot 5?
It was Lot 5.
Yeah.
But that was one article with a couple of options. It wasn't,
How many lots we were going to buy?
yes,
right?
it wasn't two articles at the same time.
But somehow this should get raised at the outset when we start debating issues.
Yeah.
Again, I think if new members are sworn in,
Yeah.
that he, gives them a few minutes to ask questions about procedure and things like that, and I think that's a great time to raise that issue and find out how to properly do it during town meeting.
Somebody should talk to Alan in advance.
Yeah,
Right,
so
yeah,
that's
yeah.
what I said.
I think that's a great idea, because then he's prepared for that.
Right, that's, we're planning on it, so, but just to be clear here, I don't know how the state's gonna view either of these. They might nix 100 unit capacity off both, so I find them right now, they are technically compliant as submitted, and both are technically compliant, and that's why I feel both, right now as they stand, would be at the town of Reading compliance.
Andrew, did this issue come up at the earlier meeting that you had? I know this is the second, this question of discussing them both at the same time at town meeting.
Nope.
This come up at the last meeting? No?
Do you sense there's more town meeting members at this meeting than the previous one?
Yes.
That's right.
Okay, good point.
We're all thinking ahead, and it's next week,
It's
you know?
next week.
Right. I'm gonna jump over here and then Carla in the back.
So I feel like town meeting,
Oh.
Mr. Chair, he's recognizing me, I have the floor. Just the town meeting members remember, you may find a mechanism on which you can discuss both, go back and forth, find whatever mechanism you want to do it. But be aware that you cannot take a vote and say, okay, how many want 16, how many want 17?
Right.
You have to do it one at a time.
Right.
But at least after start the debate on vote.
Or you can die.
If there could be debate on vote and then vote for one or
But
the
at
other.
some point, when the debate is done, and you're repeating yourself ad infinitum, that's going to happen.
Like we were.
You vote on it, you have to take an action on each article individually. Either yes or no, or you would, you cannot take, what goes above there, and say, okay, how many town meeting members want 16, how many minutes want 17? You have to do it separately.
Yeah.
That's,
That's the mechanism, that's actually the law.
yeah, that's fine, as long as the debaters have been able to.
I don't think you're gonna have, be able to get it all, take like a straw poll and tell, this study wants 16, this study wants 17, so let's look, let's know one got the most.
That's
Just
essentially,
do it one
that's
at a
essentially
time.
what the vote is anyway. You know, the people who vote for 16 and the people who vote for 17.
I'm curious about something. How many of our attendees tonight are town meeting members? Oh. So just thoughts that come up will be.
Come up again.
This, what is going on here is going to happen with 3 times as many people. If this doesn't get resolved by the moderator and by what the intentions of CPDC is, if CPDC's intentions are to push this so a majority vote happens on the first one, then that's disingenuous, and it is not fair to do that to this board. This has to be thoroughly vetted and thought out by the moderator and CPDC before it gets to this type of crap show on the floor, because then the whole thing gets torched. So we shouldn't have to have this discussion. It needs to go back and to town manager, town clerk, moderator, and it needs to get straightened out before.
Right, because people are going to want to be asking details on
Yeah,
setbacks and
so
stuff, all the people.
What you just said, it could get much more complicated, because neither of these might be accepted.
It will get more complicated.
And we still don't know what the SJC is going to rule. And if we vote on one of these and accept one, are we stuck with it?
Yes.
Even if the SJC.
Until we change it back, and then a development could come in. I mean, Westford and Lexington have had hundreds of units already get proposed within weeks and months of their passing things. So
Right.
even if you say, oh, we're stuck with it, we're going to go change it at next town meeting, in the meantime,
Right.
developers
So
come.
that's what I'm saying, it could be much more complicated than just which ways it was going.
I saw this hand up first.
One more thing, Mike. Now, I've been in town meeting 31 years, so this has happened before, just as Angela said. Usually though, when you have articles which are on the same subject and have different approaches or maybe they want to do it, usually the one that's taken first is the desired one, and the second one is the fallback. And if for some reason the first one doesn't work, and in fact, usually it's when we're having to comply with some sort of state standards or federal standards or something like that. There's usually, the first one is the preferred one, and the second one is the fallback. We'll still achieve it, but, for whatever reason, the first one didn't pass. So it should be sort of structured in a hierarchy, so that, I guess the preferred one should go first. And you can talk about the second one, sure. But I think usually you vote on the first one because it's the primary objective. And
How do you talk about the second one, though? Because I don't think the moderator's going to allow that.
You can. He has the deal, I don't know how legally he does it, but sometimes you can open them up both and you can talk about it. But technically, you're only really on the first one. So.
Right. CPDC brought both, so both could be discussed. It was not.
And then go on to the next one, but I guess you can allow discussion on the second, even though you can't vote on it, or make motions on it, things like that. And
Change it,
there's gonna be a lot of,
Yeah, there will be a lot of amendments, and it's important for citizens to understand that town meeting members get to speak first, and only when the town meeting members are done speaking do the citizens have an opportunity to speak. So the town meeting members do get preferential treatment in terms of the debate at first. But the thing that I wanted to bring up, which, again, you've heard this from me before, but MBTA communities law is deemed unconstitutional, these are in place. And the by right language of that means that the developers can do what they want. So I think it's very important that people understand what they're voting on, because yes, these are proposed to meet the requirements of the MBTA Communities Act, but it becomes law in Reading whether that act is here or not. And so we have to be really careful about that and understand. I mean, even if these do get approved, they could be undone at a later town meeting, but they would be in place until that town meeting happens, and developers could take advantage of that. Just a risk that people have to understand.
Would you propose that someone move to table both of these until they?
No, because
Well,
then the
problem
state
with
will
that
take
is
our
we-
grants.
We missed the deadline that the state has imposed.
Yeah.
Unless the town votes adamantly against these, for whatever reason, like they don't like the Commonwealth telling them how to zone their properties. But I wouldn't do that. I mean, I would propose the articles, let the town debate this. If they pick one and approve it, then it should be, sent to the state for approval and try to meet those deadlines. If it gets categorically denied, or both articles get, they're not approved, then there's nothing to do. The zoning changes don't happen. This town of Reading will be deemed non-compliant by the Commonwealth, and they're going to probably take legal action, which will be highly dependent upon legal action that's already filed.
I mean, if we find something that doesn't work, we've made a good faith effort. I don't think they take the grants. At least if we do something.
Yeah, in my mind, in an ideal world, these articles would be refused, and then the town would actually propose these articles or articles similar to it, and it would come from the residents of Reading rather than from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Oh, you mean
I have no
it's-
problem with
yeah.
these as long as the town of Reading endorses one or both or
Someone
whatever.
competition.
I would love to see these zoning changes come from the citizens and Cpdc rather than being shoved down our throats by the Commonwealth. That's my only objection. And the other objection I have is the language of by right. It really, in my mind, it removes the town's ability to control what gets developed in this town. And for those two reasons, I would speak out against this, and I probably will be at town meeting speaking out against this. But
Would you at town meeting propose to amend either or both to remove the by right?
well, if you do that, then you simply will not comply to MBTA communities. You won't be able to submit anything, and you will be found, the town will be found non-compliant regardless. Because that is the critical piece of the language from the state, because without the by right, basically the development happens at the same way that development happened within traditional zoning. The by right is there to make it easier for the development to actually happen. The only way you can do that is by taking away the town's ability to limit what the developers do. So that's the whole reason why it's written that way. And, I disagree with it simply because it takes away the town's control of their own zoning, right? I don't like that. I think that Reading is the way it is because the citizens of Reading have zoned it that way for the last 300 years, or however many long the town's been around. I don't see any reason to change that now. I do recognize that there is a substantial need for additional housing. I agree with that. And I want to see that happen, but I want to see it come from the citizens of Reading, not from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. If that happens, I'm all in.
Because we're in phase one, which is zoning. Phase two is going to come from the state, which is going to be construction, mandated construction.
Yeah, if they don't see development happening at the pace that they expect, they're going to say, we're going to come in and do it
Right?
ourselves.
Look at Lexington, right? Their development, their proposals in right now are like 900 units, okay? So we're in phase one, which people say, oh, it's just, you don't have to do anything, we're laying out our zoning. Phase two, whatever the state decides, we're in, we have no control. That is gonna happen. What's phase three gonna be, right? We have lost complete control, and even for what it looks like.
you know, we looked at some of these beautiful buildings up here.
Yeah.
We don't have any say in what
And
the buildings are going to look like.
And the reality of what we're seeing from the communities that have already submitted MBTA zoning changes is that developments are being submitted at a rapid pace, okay? The developers are just licking their chops at the opportunity to come in here and do that. So that's why I don't want this passed, you know, and then reversed at a spring town meeting, because between now and the spring, there could be 5 proposals sitting at Cpdc for developments, and there wouldn't be any way to stop that.
Aren't there
if
like
the
5
by-right
proposals now
language
coming in in
is
South Main?
approved, so.
Things are coming in.
Nope, I don't have, I mean, we have mixed use, a mixed use project, so, right. None of the proposals in Lexington were mandated builds, right? They wrote their zoning to facilitate development, they're getting development. I understand everything everybody is saying, but just for context, Main Street and downtown have been established priority development action areas in the town, in your own plans, in your own long-term plans. So both areas call for housing in those community developed plans. So I do just want to make that clear that, right, with CPDC, that's where we ended up of, let's focus on the areas that the community has already established as development areas that are already developing housing and are going to continue developing housing, because that's what we've already wrote and prioritized in these areas. And that's where we're at right now, that both.
Except for North Main Street.
What was that?
Except for North Main Street.
North Main Street has the mixed-use allowances on it. Business A allows mixed-use development. That is Business A.
So North Main already allows mixed use?
Yes,
Just hasn't gotten any.
right. And all of Business A allows multifamily just for 40,000 square foot lots or more. That was must have been 20, 30, 40 years ago. I don't know how long ago that one was written in, but
None of those are by right.
the development at the Smith Oil site was by right. All of the ones on South Main Street, to my knowledge, were by right, besides the recently approved mixed-use developments, which were special permit.
I have a question about the Smith Oil site.
Mm-hmm.
So it looks from the road that they put parking underneath the first floor of the building. And is that where we're likely to see in the future, you know, on larger sites that, you know, and then they don't count the underground parking as one of their floors, is that right?
Yeah, so in all of the design guidelines, parking is, and through the controls, parking to the rear of the site and bring the building up, right? Get the building and the massing away from residential abutters in the rear or to the side, bring it up closer to the street. 0 foot doesn't make sense on Main Street, but then parking underneath or in the rear of the lot with landscaping and screening.
You know,
And then another question, you had mentioned that along Main Street, there's a bunch of properties where there are wetlands in the background. Does that area of wetlands get disregarded when they're figuring out the number of units that can fit on that site, or do they get a credit because, you know, they're preserving wetlands?
So in terms of acreage, the compliance tool will count wetland areas, excluded land, wetland regulations remain. This does not supersede wetland regulations locally or at the state level. It will be counted as excluded and or sensitive land, but our density allowances on the lot keep the unit capacity, to my understanding. So the acreage might be trimmed a little bit, but the units allowed can remain.
So the units allowed is based upon
The total
including
lot
the
size,
wetlands?
right,
Okay,
right.
thank you.
I guess my only comment in addition was that as much of it as, you know, the information that you just said about what the existing, you know, rules allow and so on, the more that kind of stuff can be put up at the front, I think will be helpful. Because again, you know, this is very, very complex, especially for those of us who haven't been following it to a really, you know, detailed level. So any of that information that can be put up front so that to kind of inform how drastic these proposals are. You know, well, it's maybe not as drastic as we think because some of these rules already apply. You know, that would be really helpful. And again, I'm just thinking about expediting some of this discussion because there's a lot of emotion and a lot of complexity.
Yeah, I think for the town meeting presentation through tonight, I would like to add what is the minimum compliance, what is the state asking of Reading, and then yes, how these areas fit into our existing plans and allowances. So, heard.
Just a comment, and that is that I really appreciate the work that you and your team have done to get this together, because this is a nasty task.
Thank you. I've had a blast. I don't know about you guys.
You've been able to massage the public comments that have come in. You've got a proposal here, two proposals that I think do minimum damage to the town.
Yeah, we've come a long way
We
from
have.
where we
You've
were.
come a long way.
That's-
And, however, as a town meeting member, I think it's very important to understand that it's not A or B. We have a duty to think about the town and think about what either of these projects will do to the town, and whether we still have the right to zone, we have our own jurisdiction to deal with, and whether we want to deal with the state or not. And the state is still telling us where we have to do something, and that is where we have to zone for their needs, and whether this really is a significant step towards getting housing that is sorely needed. And I think that that's the big problem that we have to wrestle with, much less so than whether it's A or B. But again, you did a great job getting us to A and B.
Thank you. And yep, heard on all fronts, and I'll just shout out, I won't name them, but all of the staff and Cpdc and volunteers and the public who've gotten us to this point too, so. Go ahead.
Small issue, probably got a pretty good preview, but I mean,
Oh, yeah.
But they're not going to be the ones up there. CPDC.
you'll be in the room.
Chair?
John Weston?
Is John Wester, who's the chair?
John is the chair.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think, how many nights are we going to do this, you think?
Just for this, 4 nights?
I don't know. Well, I feel like, I always say, oh, the dog regulations will be a whole night, but hopefully they won't be controversial. Remember, we spent the whole night arguing on dog poop within the last year? And this one is like the leash law
All right.
limits.
You never know what's going to set everybody off, but you know this will.
Oh, yeah.
That's good, because people care.
Were there any other questions before we wrap up at 9 o'clock?
No, I think we're all set.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming.
Yeah, no, this was helpful. I can get more people.